Alright chaps, I always do that at the start of a video, I apologise. I can't tell how the lighting is or anything because I've got the flipping grey scale thing that comes in after 11 o'clock to help me sleep, ironically, and it's 10 past midnight, so clearly it's working. I touched upon something in my isolation for vlog, and I figured we'd briefly mention it now because essentially it doesn't need to generate a whole video. But I was thinking today about all this controversy about Churchill, and for some reason when I was thinking about it, one particular incident came to mind, and that is when Churchill was knocked down by a car in December 1931 when he was in New York City. And I've heard about this before I even read any biography of Churchill because it featured in one of the What If anthologies, What If Churchill Was Killed? I mean, he very nearly could have been. Typical Britisher in America, he didn't really pay attention to which way traffic flowed. Much like how when I was working as a tour guide until I was furloughed, there was once a time somebody walked in front of our bus and we stopped like that close to him, and then apparently it was and my driver went, in America now, you gotta look left. Because I was thinking, what would be the repercussions of Churchill being killed in 1931? I mean, it was kind of his wilderness years, 1931. He wasn't a rich man. I mean, he had money, I'd imagine, and some would say too much. I mean, he had Chartwell, but the impression I have from what I've read is that there wasn't enough money. He was spending money like he had bucket loads, but there wasn't enough. From a few sources I've read is that he essentially made his millions, so to speak, after the Second World War. And so in 1931 he is in the United States doing a bunch of talks. And if you excuse me, Jack, because I need to refer to it so I can quote. I was looking at Roy Jenkins's Churchill book, which I consider the book on Churchill. There are many others, let's be honest. And as far as I'm aware, Jenkins was not politically aligned with Churchill. He seems to admire him, but I think he sort of stood back from the topic. I mean, Churchill's a huge character, really, isn't he? Whether we like him or not. So, where is it? He was going to do a 40 lecture tour, which was to bring him about £10,000 in 1931 currency. I wouldn't like to say what that is nowadays. His first talk was Pathway of the English-speaking People, and where is it? The evening after that, he was back in New York at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel on Park Avenue, and after a quiet dinner with Clementine, responded to an invitation from Bernard Barish to go and meet a few friends, at his Fifth Avenue apartment a mile or so further uptown. He set out by cab without the exact address, but apparently thinking that the driver would know how to find it. On this basis, he would have been lucky in New York to have got to the Plaza Hotel, let alone a private residence. The result was that hours were straight in search. Eventually, he thought he saw a familiar doorway, stopped the taxi on the Central Park side, and endeavoured to cross Fifth Avenue on foot. On the way, he was knocked down by a car travelling at rather more than 30 miles an hour. Now, Mr. Jenkins, who died a few years ago, adds a little footnote, and reminds me of one of my lecturers at uni who said, I really do hate footnotes because you're constantly you're reading the text and you're going down. But no one would have thought end notes are just as annoying because you go, oh, like that, And in the footnotes he goes, I find confusing the Martin Gilbert account of the accident. Admirably precise, although Gilbert nearly always is, and Gilbert was one of the experts on Winston Churchill because he was almost personally charged by the Churchill family to write A history of Churchill. Fifth Avenue, unlike today, was then two-way. As he stopped the taxi on the parkside, the adjacent traffic would have been going down, and if he looked left, as Gilbert says he mistakenly did, then he would have been in the correct direction for the first stage of the crossing. Maybe he ought to have embraced both ways, for it was at the second stage that he was caught by a car, brackets, not a taxi, as has been commonly written, end brackets, coming out down. His fault must therefore have been that he did not look both ways, and cannot be too easily attributed to the perverse habit of the Americans of driving on the right. In any event, he was nastily hit and gallantly maintained to the quickly arriving brackets cop, and inverted commas, that it was entirely his own fault. As a result, his Italo-American accidental assailant, a temporarily unemployed truck driver, not much like am I, it's midnight, not only visited Churchill in hospital, but also attended, somewhat beyond the call of guilt or duty, Churchill's first lecture of his resume tour in Brooklyn on 28 January, which would have been 1932. And it goes on to say in the main body of text, just as he had assured the New York police that it was his fault and not that of the assaulting driver, that he had been run down, so he generally said it was an English bug which he had brought with him rather than a German bug. Anyway, I would just like to say on record, as somebody else I believe has said, that that poor taxi driver or car driver, he's just knocked down Winston Churchill. Now Churchill was famous in various ways and means by then, but not massively famous to all he was in after World War II. And as Roy Jenkins says, he thinks to himself, "Oh my God, I have flaming knocked down a man. I'll go and listen to his lecture." And I can only assume he was bored witless. But the what if, as I say, is if Winston Churchill was killed. And I said in the vlog that, the thing is with what if, you do not know for sure how it would play out. What if John F. Kennedy survived Dallas and had a second term? What if, Germany invaded Britain in 1940? What if Germany defeated Russia in 1941-42? What if? Now, on a more basic level, and you'll feel free to disagree with me, chaps, that Churchill, whether we like him or not in the modern day age, was one of the few voices in the 1930s that was saying, look, Hitler's a bad man. He is going to do bad things. He wants to rearm Germany, and he's not exactly nice to the Jews, and we can't exactly let that happen. Now, there were those probably who thought Churchill was doing this, to get himself back into the cabinet, but it does seem that Churchill did give half a fig about these issues, and apparently when he went over to Germany in 1932, maybe 33, I think it was before Hitler came to power. He was with his son Randolph, not the smartest chap in history, and there was talk about him meeting Hitler at Berchtesgaden or some such, and something happened that stopped it. I think Churchill pulled out of it, or Hitler did. And some people say that in itself is a great wife of history, because famously Churchill and Hitler never met. They waged war against one another from opposite ends of Europe. So I don't think in itself Churchill meeting Hitler in 1930, whatever, would have made any difference. If anything, it would have gave either man a kind of appreciation of the man they were fighting. Let's say Churchill was killed in 1931. He's a minister in the wilderness, or he's not a minister. There's no one in the 1930s to say this man is a menace. There were other people, but no one of prominence. Come 1940, Norway's falling to pieces. The Chamberlain administration can't carry on. the options are Halifax and someone else. They go for Halifax. Halifax is peace-minded. He appeases Hitler. He makes peace with Hitler in and around the Dunkirk evacuation, say, or before the Dunkirk evacuation. Britain ends up becoming effectively a puppet state of Nazi Germany because Hitler would have exerted some kind of force, surely. Is it too simplistic of you? Probably. I mean, like I say, what if counterfactual history, whatever you want to call it, is an imprecise science? But even Andrew Roberts said that you can sort of learn from history sometimes through the alternate options. Could Churchill's death have made that much difference? Could somebody else, say in the late 1930s, have popped out of the woodwork and said, hey look, Hitler is a bad man. He has got concentration camps that are imprisoning enemies of the state. He is rearming at a rate of knots. His military are training at a furious rate. I mean, you know, the Germans, I think in the early 30s, were in Russia learning how to use tanks and aircraft and whatever. Because obviously, because of the First Eye Treaty, they couldn't in Germany. But also, let's be honest, had Churchill died in New York City in 1931, the negative aspects of him would not have happened. The Bengal famine, the comments he made. But then again, it's great to say that, I mean, from what I've read, and, you know, being at university, I was taught to look around, you know, more than one source, do this, that and the other. Try and base your opinion from more than one source and look at topics. One view, the other view. Supposedly, according to the Churchill Project and Churchill College at Cambridge, there was no evidence that Winston Churchill was purposely staffing the Bengalis. He had racist opinions, which, you know, I do not agree with, but he at the same time instructed the government of the day to do the best to help them out. Had he died in 1931, would that have been different? Surely it must have been. I think I've said before, chaps, that my nan, God bless her, because she died in 2017, she was about 15 or 16 when the Second World War was declared, and she, you know, we've all heard, presumably, some of us anyway, Chamberlain's famous speech, you know, once again this country is at war with Germany. And Nanny told me and my brothers that her dog died that day and she was more concerned with her dog dying, which is fair enough. She's 15, 16. And then she said Churchill was the right man at the right time. As Max Hastings said in the Times, he was a racist, but we should not judge him wholly on that. We should bear in mind I don't know. Churchill died 20 years and 8 and a bit months before I was born. I don't know when it started, but I started to admire Winston Churchill when I got into history. And I was a bit of an idiot, more so of an idiot, when I started university. I still remember it was the last week of September 2005, so 15 years ago. And we were told you're going to have like a tutor that will see you through the 3 years of university. And it's dear old Tony Gorst, who I believe is still with us, but he's no longer a tutor at my uni. And I was 2 weeks past my 20th birthday. God. And we all sat there and we had to introduce ourselves, and I was kind of nervous. I wanted to go to university all my life in a way, and Westminster was the best bet. King's College London flat out rejected me. Portsmouth, I wonder sometimes I should have gone. I like Portsmouth. I practically grew up there in a way. I support the football team. And he asked us excuse me, who was our favourite Prime Minister. Muggins said without hesitation, when it came to me, Winston Churchill, and he said, what about Clement Attlee? And I said, what about him? I saw a documentary once that said there was an old joke in the 1940s. A taxi pulls up in front of number 10, and the only person that comes out of it is Clement Attlee. And that was 2005, and since 2005 a lot has come to my head, come to my mind. I've read a lot of books, I've read a lot of sources, I've done this, that and the other, and I think to myself, if only I could take myself now back to uni, because a lot of my essays, a lot of my thinking is infantile compared to what it is now. I no longer think Winston Churchill was the best Prime Minister. Winston Churchill was a Prime Minister for war. There was nothing when he was Prime Minister the second time round really that sort of says, oh, this man was the greatest Prime Minister. I have somebody else in mind that is controversial, but we'll leave it there. The point is, I'm told, possibly, that I have certain way of looking at things like the Empire, like Churchill and the rest. It's tricky. No person in history is a black and white character that we can say, they were this, they were that. John F. Kennedy was one of the greatest men of the 20th century. The vision he had, the ideas he had, what he could have done. But on the flip side, he was a womanizer, he was bending the rules, he was doing things, put it mildly, let's not go into that. Every great person in history has a good side and a bad side. I, for example, not a great man of history. I've not done anything yet. I think I could be split down the middle in terms of good and bad. We all have that. Somebody will say, well, you haven't murdered millions. I find the language incendiary. To me, a murderer, and I haven't checked the dictionary definition, let's have a look, is somebody that does it personally. And I suppose it's, splitting hairs and all the rest of it. Sorry, I laugh. I shouldn't laugh, but I've googled it, and the Google brings up like their version. It says murderer, and it gives you the pronunciation, and it just says a person who commits murder. Hang on, let's have a look. People also ask. I love people also ask on Google. I once googled Kirk Douglas, and it said years and years ago, and it said people also ask, and I googled, and I opened it up, and it said, is Kirk Douglas dead? When will Kirk Douglas die? How old is Kirk Douglas? And I'm like, so let's have a look. What's the difference between killing and murdering? Killing is the act of ending a person's life to cause the death or something. Murder is a legal term when you call... Okay, well maybe that's... What makes someone a murderer? Although psychological gratification is the usual motive for serial killing, and most serial killings involving sexual contact, the Federal Bureau of Investigation states that the motives of serial killers can include anger, thrill-seeking, financial gain, and attention-seeking. and I love the offer options. What is it when you kill your unborn baby? What is it when you kill your wife? What are the 3 signs of a serial killer? Who is the #1 serial killer? What serial killer has the most kills? And I've just tapped on who is the #1 serial killer, and it says Harold Shipman, who killed 218 patients, one of history's deadly. Okay, let's have a look. What is the meaning in the Cambridge Dictionary? I'm sorry, chaps. I'm determined to find out now. Someone who illegally and intentionally kills another person. Oh, flipping cookies. Convicted, and examples: a convicted murderer, a mass murderer, someone who has killed a large number of people illegally. So, okay. Winston Churchill was a mass murderer. I don't know why, but anyway, I'll leave it there, chaps. It's now almost, well, it's just after midnight, so if anyone watching has any what ifs, larger the Second World War, because I'm a modern history student. If you have any what ifs, I'll try my best to answer them. But if you have any what ifs that you've pondered, what you think about, let us know. I'll see if I can take them on. And if anyone knows Christopher Plummer and Lockhart, George Lazenby, and others, do let us know. Trying to lighten the mood, chaps. Trying to lighten the mood. Have a good one, chaps. And don't do drink and drugs, eh?